Today I'm going to be trying out my new Ohuhu markers and talking a little bit about my process, how I found them, what my thoughts were. If you've been thinking about buying these markers, then maybe this video might be interesting for you. You're also welcome to stay and just watch along the process of me making this new piece that I worked on. So I recently came up with this idea in my sketchbook of a little mole reading his little book underground. I decided this would be a good piece to try out my new markers with. I took the sketch from my sketchbook and refined it on my iPad, and then I decided to trace it directly from my iPad. And you can do this in an easy way by triple pressing the home button to turn on guided access, which means you can trace without touching the screen and moving things around, and then you can just turn it back off again once you're done. I'm using a 125 gram sheet of paper. I'm not working on this piece directly in my sketchbook because, as you may know, alcohol markers tend to bleed through to the other side of the page. I've actually had these markers for a couple months now, I think, but that's also the reason why I haven't gotten around to using them, is because I mostly have been working in my sketchbook. I also suggest using a thinner paper because that way it'll use less ink and hopefully your pens will dry out less fast. Then next I chose which colors I wanted to use for my illustration. I could have probably planned this a bit better on my iPad beforehand, for example, but I sort of just wanted to go into it and see how it went. I did notice when swatching the new colors that I chose that they turned out a little bit different than on the swatch sheet. So I think per paper the colors tend to change a little bit. So it's probably good to try out the pens on the paper you're actually planning to use. Once you've put down a dark color, you can't go lighter again. And for that reason, because this illustration had a specific light source, I decided to start with that, just to be sure that the lights were in place there where they needed to be. Throughout the illustration, I used a mix of the small nib and the flat, bigger end based on how much detail I needed to put or how small the space was. But I did find that switching between the two wasn't so seamless on the page. You could sort of tell which nib was used to fill in what part. So I kind of wish that there was more of a seamless blend between using the smaller nib and switching to the bigger nib. But I get that with markers, that's not always possible. I think I never really liked markers in the past because I'm sort of a perfectionist in the way that I don't love that the markers can't achieve one uniform color, but rather you see all the pen strokes. This is especially true for like bigger pieces of color, for example the background, but I'm starting to let go of my perfectionist habits and I try to really embrace the fact that you can see every line, even though I think these markers were meant to be a bit more uniform in their application. I think going over with a second layer sometimes helps to try and make a bit more of a uniform application, but that also makes your colors darker. So for example, with the light source, I did a second layer, but then the yellow turned out quite a bit darker than I had originally planned it to be. The way I planned to use these markers was to create a base with just the markers, and later go over the base with my color pencils to refine some details or add highlights or shadows or extra line work. I've seen a lot of people use these markers in that way as a base and going over the markers with something else, whether that be color pencils or like a micron fine liner. This technique sort of matches my style. If I'm not doing that with markers, I often do that with a watercolor base and then going over the watercolor with color pencils. I find it difficult to achieve a finished look with a color pencil piece solely using color pencil without having some kind of base below it. Something I didn't realize before I bought these markers was that you could actually choose the combination of tips that you wanted. All the markers come with dual tips, and the ones that I bought is a fine tip and a chisel tip on the other side. But most artists that I see using these markers are using the brush tip end of the markers. So if I knew that beforehand, I think I probably would have ordered the brush tip option. I've also seen a lot of artists using the brush tip and it seems easier to blend with than the chisel tip. I also just think it's a nice feature that they offer the customization option of choosing which tips that you like to work best with. So here you can see the close-up of the base layer with just the markers, and you can see the blotchiness that I was mentioning earlier and all the pen strokes. This is something that I tried to fix when I went in with the color pencils after to try and make it a little bit less obvious. I think the main attractive selling point of the Ohuhu markers is their price point. It's not cheap, I will say that, but compared to some of the other marker brands out there like Copic markers or Pro markers, which go for ridiculous amounts of money just for one marker, these are much cheaper in comparison. Something I've also seen is that they released a sketch pad, which is supposed to work well with their markers and shouldn't bleed through to the other side. I haven't tried this myself and I haven't seen any artists using it yet, but I think that's a really cool thing that you could buy alongside the markers so that you don't have to worry about the bleeding aspect. Something I don't think I fully explored in this piece was the blending abilities of the markers. I did it a little bit with the light source blending in with the background, and I think it went quite well. And another thing is the layering of the pens. I don't think I really layered a lot or tried to layer two different colors to try and get a different color, but I've seen other artists do that and it works quite well. In conclusion, I do like how these markers felt. I enjoyed working with them. I also like that there is an option for markers that are on a bit of a cheaper price point compared to everything else on the market. I think that that's nice in trying to make art a little bit more accessible. And because the price point was a little bit lower, I was able to afford more colors. I never even really considered buying Copic markers in the past because I knew that I would never be able to afford the wide range of colors like I was able to do with the Ohuhu markers. In general, I'm happy I bought them. I think I would have chosen for the different nibs with the brush nib, as I mentioned before, so I think that's something that you should just research before. I'm not sure they will become my main staple material that I use, but it has been nice to create a base for my illustration with a more controlled material, because with watercolor or gouache, you don't have as much control as with these markers, and you can't work as finely. I hope this video was helpful for you if you are looking into buying the Ohuhu markers, and I hope you have a great day.